Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, November 30th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about Dr. Oz in the state of Pennsylvania, a TV personality, a celebrity, someone who was known from the Oprah Winfrey Show to go on to have his own television show, a very notable name across the United States, some would even argue a household name, now announcing his bid as a Republican for the 2022 Senate election in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, this comes as a result of of the Republican Sean Parnell dropping out of the race just a few days ago, practically. I mean, just about a week ago, Sean Parnell decided, because of a ruling in a custody case with his child and his wife, or ex-wife, ultimately, that he would be removing himself from the Senate race, citing concerns that he does not want his children to believe that his priorities lie with politics more than it does with his family. So, with that withdrawal from the race, with Sean Parnell being the Trump-endorsed candidate, that has reopened this field to possible contenders for 2022. And as it stands right now, Dr. Oz was a potential name, but really wasn't a notable one until Sean Parnell had dropped out. The thing is, you can't win a Republican primary nomination without Donald Trump's endorsement if he chooses to endorse somebody else, meaning you can't really challenge anybody who has the endorsement from Donald Trump. For instance, we saw this in the state of Georgia in the 2018 governor election, which is now the reason why Brian Kemp is governor of the state of Georgia. He was endorsed by President Trump, even though Casey Cagle, the seemingly frontrunner at the time, had an advantage at some point of 30 points more than Brian Kemp across the state due to statewide recognition. With President Trump's endorsement, he won that primary and went on to win the general election. And that's what Sean Parnell was hoping to do. So now with this withdrawal from the race, just days after he had removed himself from the race, they actually released an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer. There was a discussion here. Who would replace Sean Parnell? And interestingly enough, they had mentioned Dr. Oz. The main reason why is because he had been considering it, and there were sources coming to the media saying Dr. Oz quite literally may run for governor, for Senate of the state of Pennsylvania. And it is very interesting. There is a lot to be said about celebrities in politics, whether it works, whether it doesn't. Sometimes it does. Donald Trump, of course, being the perfect example. In fact, as the only Republican to win Pennsylvania in the entirety of the 21st century on the presidential level, dating all the way back to 1988. That was the last time that Pennsylvania was in the Republican column. So looking at Donald Trump in 2016, he had a very good margin. It was something that, yes, it was close, but at the end of the day, he was flipping a state that had long lasted with the Democratic Party, even in years that were arguably worse for Democrats in some of these more contentious elections. 2 years prior, in 2014, Democrats flipped the governorship by nearly 10 points, despite losing nationwide by 6-7% across the nation. So, looking at the state of Pennsylvania for Dr. Oz's case, they may be inclined to vote for celebrities, with Donald Trump being the only real example of it, but I wouldn't exactly say that him being a celebrity, Dr. Oz's name recognition, is the reason why he's electable. By the time you reach the general election, it is inevitable that most people will find out who the candidates are. If they're voting in the election, they generally understand one candidate is the Republican, one candidate is the Democrat, and they sort of figure out a good amount of information about either side. With Dr. Oz's candidacy, though, I do think this puts him in a pretty powerful position for this race. Currently speaking, people expect the Pennsylvania Republican primary to go to Dr. Oz following this announcement. If you actually take a look at the recent surge, before he had even announced, he was still hovering pretty high. People had a pretty high expectation for him even before he had even decided to run for United States Senate. And then following, of course, the announcement, all of a sudden the tides change and Dr. Oz is right up here. So with his large lead in this preliminary predicted data, I can only imagine if Donald Trump was to endorse him, how high these numbers would actually reach. Taking a look at the numbers in the past, the most that anybody got at a period of time was 27 cents, one peak being 57 cents on the 4th of November here. But ultimately, Sean Parnell was meant to be that one nominee. He was doing very well earlier on and decided that he was going to withdraw himself from the race. Now, in this general election, the numbers really haven't changed much following Dr. Oz's announcement. Even though people are expecting an entirely different Republican nominee at this point, people aren't expecting the race to be less inclined to vote for the GOP. Democrats narrowly go up 1 cent, but it's nothing super substantial. These are typically things that happen just as days go on. Subtle changes, nothing monumental with Dr. Oz's announcement. And it makes sense. He is going to be facing off in a very contentious race, regardless of the fact that Joe Biden may be disapproved of at this point in time, or maybe even disapproved of on Election Day. You see, Dr. Oz is running on a platform that is very similar to President Trump and many other Republicans across the nation. In his article here, where he announced his candidacy through the Washington Examiner, he said he was running to respond to the COVID-19 response from public officials in the state of Pennsylvania, saying it has been mishandled by elites who stifled dissenting opinions, mandated policies, and closed our parks, shuttered our schools, shut down our businesses, and took away our freedom. It's like he took this right out of President Trump's handbook, right out of many other Republicans across the nation, arguably more conservative Republicans than some others have been way bigger proponents of these ideas that mask mandates and closures are in response to public fear, or more so for public fear rather than public safety. And I think that's what Dr. Oz is really going to get out here. He doesn't offer an opinion that is electable in every single state. I think in Pennsylvania specifically, it will do him well amongst the GOP, but he's not taking the most centrist, nonpartisan positions on issues that are important to more than just one political party in the state of Pennsylvania. For instance, the concern in the state of Pennsylvania is larger than just 50% of the public that worries about COVID-19. There are Republicans out there who do wear their masks, who get vaccinated, and do have concerns about COVID-19 altogether. So he does, in essence, seem to be alienating a big portion of the public in Pennsylvania. But by the time we reach the general election, I'm sure he will drop such rhetoric because by then he will already have won the nomination. This, right now, what we are going to see with many of these Republicans is pretty much them shifting further to the right in an effort to win over President Trump. They want to get the former president's endorsement because they know that will be the done deal. Whoever is endorsed by Donald Trump will ultimately end up being the Republican nominee without a doubt. There may be very small cases where that won't be true by the time we reach the primary season and the primary season end in 2022, but I honestly don't think that will be at all something noticeable. If Trump is endorsing someone, chances are they will become the Republican nominee. Of course, if they're being endorsed as a Republican in that case, disregarding possible third-party runs or people running as a conservative in New York instead of Republican to be more conservative, whatever it might be. Right, but in 99% of cases, the person endorsed by Trump will end up winning that nomination. So right now, Dr. Oz is definitely taking a bit more of a conservative opinion than I think is actually electable in the state of Pennsylvania. And I also wanted to point out, as I did a few minutes ago, talking about why, no matter what, Dr. Oz is going to face off in a competitive race. 2020, Joe Biden won the popular vote by 4.5%, but won the state of Pennsylvania by a margin of 1.2%. Sorry about that, my screen recorder cut out, but I was talking about Pennsylvania and the competitive nature of it that goes and extends into even the best of years for both political parties. For instance, 2020 is a perfect example in which Democrats won an electoral trifecta with the United States Senate, House of Representatives, and presidential victory in the state of Pennsylvania specifically with that 1.2% margin of victory. But ultimately, the race was still close despite the national environment being plus 4.5% for Joe Biden. Back in 2016, when the national environment was nearly the complete opposite. When Donald Trump and the Republican Party won a trifecta then, the state of Pennsylvania was still decided by a margin of 0.72%. It was exceptionally close, and ultimately it was one of the narrowest races of the 2016 election cycle. And taking a look at the Senate election that coincided with the 2016 presidential election, Pat Toomey only won his race by 1.5%. And traditionally speaking, especially during this election year, neighboring in Ohio, despite Donald Trump winning the state of Ohio by 8 points, Rob Portman wins by over 20. In the state of Iowa, Donald Trump wins by 9 points, Chuck Grassley wins by 25. So, in many cases, the incumbents, especially across this region, outperformed Donald Trump pretty considerably. Even Wisconsin, another state to group in here, Ron Johnson won by a margin of about 3.4%. Donald Trump only won the state by less than a percentage point. So, Pennsylvania was still exceptionally close. And even in a red wave year, which many Republicans expect to see in 2022, just as they did in 2010 and 2014. Even in 2010, Pat Toomey, with this being currently, it was a weird race because Arlen Specter was the incumbent, former Republican, now Democratic senator. He was there as the incumbent, ran as a Democrat in the Democratic primary against Representative Joe Sestak, lost the race very narrowly. He was a huge deal because he switched political parties from Republican to Democrat, giving the Democratic Party 60 seats in the United States Senate. But in Pennsylvania, despite the fact that there was a huge red wave year, with the GOP winning by nearly 10 points in the governorship on the same election, by winning 63 more House seats than they did in the year prior, 2 years prior, in 2010, Pennsylvania was still decided by a margin of just 2 percentage points for Pat Toomey. And that was how the result ultimately ended up. The thing is, taking a look at our election results in the state of Pennsylvania, historically speaking, it ends up being pretty close. And 2022 likely won't be any different. So despite Dr. Oz being a very well-known name across the state of Pennsylvania and well-known across the nation, that won't be the reason why he wins. I do think that name recognition is an important thing, but when it comes down to the Senate election, I don't think many Democrats would be necessarily inclined to vote for him just because they know his name. There's a big difference between a popular celebrity and someone who is just well-known. I think that while Dr. Oz, in many regards, can be treated as a very well-known figure across the country, I wouldn't exactly say him running as a Republican makes that all more appealing for Democrats or even some independents to even consider backing him for 2022. Maybe if he ran as an independent, it would be a bit more easier to win over those voters, but ultimately he is choosing a side, and because of how partisan we are today, I don't think the celebrity status holds much merit beyond the primary itself. So with Dr. Oz's inclusion in the race, it's very clear that the GOP election now has a frontrunner. And in this case, that would be Dr. Oz. He is in a position where he has overcome every single other consideration for United States Senate in Pennsylvania, despite Sean Parnell being that long-lasting nominee up in the advantage. I mean, Sean Parnell was the would-be nominee, treated as such, ran in 2020 for the House election against Conor Lamb. It looked like it might have ended up being a Conor Lamb-Sean Parnell rematch in 2022. But obviously, that is no longer possible. It's also equally possible that John Fetterman wins the Democratic primary in the state of Pennsylvania. But with Dr. Oz at the helm of the GOP, it will be an extremely interesting election. And I'm honestly going to be very closely watching this race. Because, again, as I mentioned way earlier on in this video, there is now a precedent that celebrities can choose to run for political office, and they will likely find themselves doing pretty well compared to other candidates. And that makes sense. You are pretty much mixing and matching people who are well-known outside of politics versus those who are well-known inside of politics. And at the end of the day, more people pay attention to reality TV, more people pay attention to shows like The Oprah Winfrey Show or Dr. Oz than they do, intensely at least, about politics. Obviously, there are core voters who will watch the news cycle, but the thing is, not everyone will know who, for instance, Carla Sands is. Maybe you might, because you watch this channel, or maybe someone who is a part of election Twitter, something of that nature. Maybe those people will know who that is. Everybody knows who Dr. Oz is. And that's why he benefits specifically in this primary, and I think that's why many other candidates that we could end up seeing potentially run in 2022. That's why there's been a lot of discussion about Matthew McConaughey potentially running for governor. He has decided not to. Actually made that announcement, I believe, yesterday or the day before. So there is certainly a lot of attention towards members of the outside media, meaning non-political media, to run for political office, and Dr. Oz is only adding to it. After Donald Trump's victory, now it's a consideration for many top names. I mean, it has not necessarily been only started by Donald Trump, of course. You have Ronald Reagan, Arnold Schwarzenegger. You have a significant amount of people in the past, at least. But that's spread out over decades. And I think we are going to start to see an increased rise, especially after 2022. If Dr. Oz actually ends up becoming a United States Senator, I see no reason why a celebrity who knows they have the name recognition, knows they have the status, would choose not to run for a political office if they have considered it at any point in time. Because if he wins this race, if he wins the general, it will send a message to those people that they can have a voice in electoral politics that won't be disregarded simply because there's a celebrity. Because I think the way that the American culture also has changed in relation to listening to celebrities for political advice, I think that previously speaking, it was entirely disregarded, and now politicians and celebrities are one and the same. And you're starting to see a lot of overlap from many top names, and we're seeing it right here, with Dr. Oz entering into the race after Sean Parnell decides to remove himself from the Pennsylvania race. Do I have any predictions about Donald Trump's potential endorsement? No, I don't. I think that there are plenty of options here. If Donald Trump wants to choose someone who aligns with him politically speaking, nobody would be, ignorant enough to run in a position where you are not a Trump Republican, especially in a competitive election. So looking at the candidate list here, you're not going to find much differentiation in terms of the way that people stand on certain major issues. Of course, everyone's going to be pro-life. Everyone's going to be, in most cases, anti-2020 election certification. A lot of these things, anti-COVID mandates, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to see a lot of that. But it does also come down to who Donald Trump personally feels would accurately represent him in the United States Senate. And I think Dr. Oz definitely has that appeal. But I'm not going to say determining that Donald Trump is going to endorse Dr. Oz. If I was to put money on it right now, I would say probably. But I'm not going to say definitively, that's exactly what I expect. And it's also very possible that some other people enter into this race following Sean Parnell's removal and those who might actually want to remove Dr. Oz from being the nominee altogether. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos, Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.